So this is the subject which Krista just talked about. We're going to touch on today around ESG as a key component now of well-managed sourcing and vendor management strategies. So ESG, the kind of environmental, social, and governance side of what corporations and companies need to think about. It's a standard that is really starting to become an incumbent part of what organizations need to be thinking about when they're looking at how they take their sourcing strategies forward. So we're going to touch on some areas in this strategy, in this talk today that I think are going to be important for you to understand what we see as providers in this market and consulting with organizations, some on a global basis, some on a European basis, some on a UK basis. And I think that a lot of sourcing strategies have always been thought about in terms of being cost driven. But there are a number of different drivers behind that now that we're seeing in organizations. The whole customer experience, the user experience, and the whole total experience are big drivers behind why people are changing their sourcing approach. The capabilities that they need in organizations are a huge part of that as well. And cost is really being driven into the value parameter, and I'll come and touch on that a little bit more later on. And then, the whole area of innovation, how do you get access to some of the new technologies? And John will talk a little bit about that in the context of this as well. But underpinning all of this is around sustainability. So where previously a number of people looked at ESG as a kind of a lip service approach to what they need to be thinking about, it's very much become part of the sustainable strategy that's driving both the cost savings and also what they're trying to do to accelerate, where they want to be as an organization. And we'll talk about what we see in the market and hopefully give you some takeaways that you can think about in the context of what you see, what's going on in the kind of transactions and the businesses that you're working with, and we can share on some of the best practice that we're seeing in those organizations.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. So diving straight in, a question for you both. What does a sourcing and vendor management strategy comprise of?
So I'll take the first part of that, which is there are 5 key areas that people should be thinking about. They're kind of captured in that quality sourcing box up there. Alignment to the kind of business and goals and outcomes that an organization wants to have. We've got cost efficiency in there, but it's really about value. What are they going to do to kind of get best advantage out of the cost base that they've got within their business, and how do they use that effectively? And then assurance. So in this case, I think it's really about benefits realization. So how do I get the benefits that I'm looking for out of having a broad kind of ecosystem of providers and support in terms of how I deliver those services? And then there's, of course, the impact of change. So how do I manage the risk and the mitigate against that for what I want to be doing as an organization? And there's the access to the kind of capabilities for future-proofing the business. So all of those are kind of underpinning components for why you drive out a sourcing and a vendor strategy with any organization, in my view.
Perfect. And how have we accelerated the tendering process?
Yeah, I think I'll take this one. It's and we've advocated this for a number of years when we've worked with some of the great clients that we've worked with over the last 5+ years. What we do is we continually market scan, we continually use our research, we continually look at what the market's doing, and we're able to therefore to cut some of the process out. So, in the new world of agile and newish world of agile, you have to keep up with the sourcing speed or alongside what you're trying to do. So we absolutely believe in cutting out part of the sort of RFI piece, which can often be 6+ weeks, and through market scan and pre-qualifying questions we call internally sort of killer questions, we're able to narrow down, understanding what the business is trying to do, 3, 4, 5 vendors or applications or providers that are going to give those or meet those requirements well. So we're able to cut the timeline down significantly, and therefore get to an answer and into a point where we're contracting between 8 and 12 weeks.
Great.
And that leads on to, I think the point of the next section really, which is to talk about, the transactions that have been accelerated are all around collaboration. And so we're looking to take those relationships from transactions into partnerships and embed within that the key things that we're expecting, both organizations who are working for clients, but also organizations that need to work together to have kind of common aims and common outcomes that they're looking for. We do this with a number of organizations, and often it starts with cost. So we've got a cost base that people are looking to address, which is spread across either a global challenge, or it's sitting in a kind of context of business units, and they're looking to kind of understand how that impacts them. So we do that kind of discovery phase of it. But the key really is about focusing on value. So how do they get to really access the opportunity which is buried within the kind of challenges they have as an organization? And we look at things such as technical debt, their architecture, their aspirations, the growth aspirations, and competitive advantage as well. So how do they want to kind of create a competitive advantage for their organization? And that's, again, where you start to see the ESG components start to blend into the whole strategy, because there you start to think about, where do I want to be as a business in the longer term? So it becomes less of a transaction, because I think that many of us, who've been in the industry for a while, know the transaction of taking people through a sourcing decision. But then it's, what are the outcomes of that sourcing decision? So how do we make sure that we've got an action plan for kind of delivering what that sourcing decision is downstream? And that really is about sustainability, which again goes to the heart of what ESG is all about.
Perfect. So you might have already covered it, Rob, but how do we initially approach that engagement with a client?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of talk to them about the business aspirations and the business goals that they have, and then break those down into kind of categories that I've already touched on, in terms of what they want to do. We also want to make sure that they have some longer term goals. So there'll be steps along the way, but there'll be some longer term goals that they're looking to achieve. And that's important, when you set out on this journey.
Yeah, and I think we touched upon it earlier. It's understanding the we talk about requirements a lot in technology, but it's understanding the short, medium, and longer term requirements, and aspirations of the business. And there are complex businesses that we deal with today that may not need certain services or technologies, because they've aspiration to break the group up or sell off parts or whatever. And it's if we get a good view of that early on, then we can match and have matched that approach to that client.
And I think if you look at kind of one of the big trends that we've seen, which is obviously the movement to cloud provided and provisioned services and SaaS type services, and even platforms, etc., as a service, all of that is about taking advantage of the investment that's been made and changing the basis on which people take services today and the way they want to take services in the future. So those are the kind of trends that we see really driving change in the way people think about their sourcing approach and who they want as partners.
And you talked about innovation earlier briefly, Rob, but it's also that's, what else can that agreement and strategy and partnership bring, that's going to bring in some of those new technologies. And we've talked a lot about observability, for instance, and have worked with a couple of clients on observability. Driving that through collaboratively with a vendor, it can only benefit what you touched upon about customer experience earlier on in the slide deck. And that's what we're getting to. So rather than the commodity compute, commodity services, it's what more? How can I drive more value through my supply chain, through my systems ecosystem, the ecosystem of our systems to benefit that end customer, for instance.
Great. Okay. So then, it says right here, ESG now an essential element, but why is ESG now a key component of sourcing and vendor management strategies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's we know that average is just not good enough any longer, and there is such a drive, and actually there's almost too much information out there about ESG. It's a bit like AI. I think everybody's sick and tired of hearing about AI this and AI that. But this is really about driving sustainable partnerships, sustainable programs of work, sustainable businesses across the board. So there are so many efficiencies to gain by following an approach utilizing ESG techniques, that they have to be part and parcel of what we do. Yeah, and I guess, just moving on to this slide, there are a number of key components around ESG, and it's really taking a bit of a route along the lines of Sarbanes-Oxley, which we all remember well and absolutely hated, but it was a evil necessity. But building confidence through public reporting and investment and so on, it is very important. So I've listed 9 areas of component areas that I think are important. On the sort of regulatory and government mandate side, you look at the EU, for instance, they've got the corporate sustainability reporting directive. It's pretty complex, it's mature, whereas the UK is pretty well behind. We've got a task force. I'm sure the new government will be looking at this, but the EU practice is maturing and needs to be observed. And of course, modern slavery acts are in place across most countries that are providing services, etc., to organisations that we're working with. But there are a number of businesses that have come into the frame recently about their working practices. I think Sheen, which is, I know through my daughter, who seems to order every other day through them, they've recently been brought up about their working practices. Those businesses will lose ground and lose customers, but purely because they are not following that, following some of those components within ESG.
And just build on the point that John's made. I think there's we think about it a lot in the context of B2C, so direct to consumer type businesses, but it goes right the way through the supply chain. It goes, B2B businesses. It's really important that they are doing the right things in terms of the way they provide their services, the way they provide the kind of underpinning technologies and the underpinning platforms that they provide their services on. So this is something which is gone from what you might call, when I remember getting involved with companies around corporate social responsibility, CSR, and the kind of evolved into where we are today. There was a lot of lip service paid to this, but it's not lip service now. It's actually an intrinsic part of what businesses need to be thinking about when they're putting together the kind of ecosystem of way their services are delivered, and it reaches back all the way back in the supply chain to where those services are being, originated. So I think it's gone way past the point of being something that people need to think about and fill in a form. They need to really think about it in terms of reaching back into the supply chain and the way those services are delivered.
Yeah, well, yeah, I totally agree, and that nicely brings on to number two, which compliance is bound to increase. International standards exist now, ISO 26000, for instance. Carbon disclosure, the UN Global Compact Agreement, and so on. And no doubt these are going to mature and become things that need to be followed. So it's getting on that ladder to build out, and it again feeds back into what we've talked about having that vendor management approach, that sourcing strategy. This is key for me. Onto things like risk management. It's all about eradicating risk. It's all about promoting the environment. About labour, and reducing disruption in supply chain. Interestingly, Harvard School did a bit of research on ESG, and it's now of the top 70 investment companies in the US, 43 is top of their list. So yeah, this is happening now. I think with investors on number 4, it's about building that confidence. Again, Rob talked about some of the previous acts and tick box exercises that existed, but with social media and so on, you can't escape this. So public reporting is really important. Having an ethical stance and so on, breeding confidence in in investments. And we work with private equity, and some of the pieces around due diligence are all about these components that I'm talking about now. Consumers are demanding ethical. I've touched upon that. It's a must.
And we were also fortunate enough to work with some of the top brands which are known globally as well as in region, and it's really important how they are seen in terms of the way they deliver their products and their services. And it's really important that they're able to reach back, as I said earlier, and evidence that they are doing the right things, both by the way they receive services into them and by the way they're delivering them out into businesses or into the public.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We move on to the 6th point there about operational efficiency, and again, a number of studies have suggested that ESG is now embedded in the way that they work, way that businesses process, that there's up to 20% operational efficiencies gained because of the way that they act and work, and this is really driving that operational efficiency piece. In fact, a McKinsey study backed that up, that 20% number, which is quite extraordinary, really. I talked about I talked about consumers and ethical and all that good stuff, but that I think all those things breed competitive advantage, and some of the things that Rob's touched upon is why we're talking about ESG in the context of sourcing, but also we're talking about it in our program management business area. When we're driving through programs of work, that we have an ESG element to everything we do within that program, and I can talk about that another time. We did touch upon innovation, collaboration, and I think one piece of research that's done. Unilever, for instance, they targeted themselves, for instance, on being 100% sustainable by 2020. They haven't hit that, by the way. They've reached 60 odd percent. But there are other cases where people like Telefonica, for instance, past 9 years, they've by adopting ESG, they've reduced their energy consumption and they've driven it through the business. And they've made a energy reduction of around 10% in a short period of time by adopting some of these practices. So it's very important. And I'll just go back last bit, the high level of transparency. I mean, it goes back to this Sarbanes-Oxley methodology. Yeah, being very transparent in what you do. And I'll touch upon on the next slide on what we're doing about it. If I can click the button.
So we've covered, why it's becoming more important, and it's very much here. So for our audience, what steps could they take to move forward with ESG, and how can we help them?
Yeah, we've created from scratch, scorecards, balanced scorecard, evaluation criteria, ESG. So the standalone pieces of work where we can go into a business and assess. But as I've mentioned before, we've driven in to our tendering processes, our sourcing strategy pieces, and our delivery of programs, design and delivery, I should say, those ESG elements. So this is not just vaporware. This is happening now, and as we do tendering processes for businesses, the scoring has a massive element around ESG, and it's not just about that scoring. It's about that also about the ability for those third parties, those vendors that we might want to deal with on behalf of our clients, having a common goal within that sustainable area, and working together in that true partnership way to drive out efficiency, the operational efficiency I talked about, the way that we treat people, the way that we govern everything that we do. So we're doing it now. It's happening.
And to pick up a thread of what John was saying, and in the bottom there about sustainable, it's a bit like when we talked about change programs in the past. How's change going in an organizations? We all know that it's not static. We all know that it's actually going to be happening all the time. And so this is not an event, and this is why it's not just transactional. This is why it's about creating the environment where you can keep on top of these things, can understand what the implications are, and you can align it to changing business needs and priorities. So it's an ongoing activity, it's an ongoing process, and it's something that we've definitely seen in clients. And of course, you get some who are going to be early adopters, you'll get some who are kind of laggards, but we're seeing a greater propensity of organizations both on the supplier side and on the client side wanting to know, how is this going to work? What's the implications of this when we look at procuring particular contracts, services, etc., etc. And we'll talk to a couple of real case examples when we get to the end.
Great. So it says at the top there, it doesn't stop there. So what else do we recommend from an ESG perspective?
Yeah, I think there's three points here. I think the regular audit piece about ensuring good practice and compliance with standards. There are a number of standards to follow, and we advocate a couple, but the work that we've built, the auditing tools that we've built take what we believe are the best of all. We're covering all of the environmental, labour practice, and governance policies in the auditing tool. So we absolutely recommend it's continuous, it's almost self-scoring. Yes, someone like us, Leading Resolutions, can come in and do that and regularly audit, but really it's about driving that in as being just a part of the everyday business as usual. Collaboration, we've touched upon quite a lot, but it's building those relationships with vendors and partners and so on. Sharing best practice and and something that we're doing with a few people at the moment is sort of joint innovation efforts. But it's, you know, keeping up that regular comms and partnership is, I think, is really important, and collaboration, as we call it here. And then everybody wants to do the third thing, you know, reduce waste. It's you know, again, it's shown that by adopting that, and we talked about that, the sort of 20% operational efficiency, you know, that drives down cost. It puts it certainly thinks in a different way about customer and customer experience, and it's well, and then the environmental aspect of all those things that we talked about, like the Telefonica piece, driving out 10% of your energy usage is, you know, it's critical that we keep doing these kind of things. So yeah, and things like we treat it as a commodity, but data, even though, you know, we're in the cloud and multi-tenants and all that great stuff, there's still huge waste in data that's there. And yeah, urge businesses to continue reviewing what they contain, what they hold in the data space.
Perfect. So coming up to one of my favorite slides. Next slide, please. So this is a lovely slide on how we've some real world examples of how we've helped our customers. Over to you guys, because you can bring these lovely examples to life.
Yeah, so the first one is you know, a very famous UK-based business that we've been working with now for 3.5 years. And this was all around labour, actually, and efficiency within labour, and helping them to not only reduce costs, but improve efficiency. So that the £2 million saving in labour costs is across project management, business analysis, and those sort of functions. And actually, it's more than that number is shown to be. But it's a really great case study for us. It shows that we can compete, and I hesitate to talk about the big four, but we can compete in you know, with large businesses in the UK and beyond, and show we can do things in a different way by bringing in a different perspective, and really matching requirements and driving through efficiency by matching those requirements fast. So that's what we did there.
Yeah, the second one on there, the multinational manufacturer who everybody would recognise if I was to name them. Of course, they went out to look at some cost benefits from looking at their licensing arrangements and so on. But as part of that, they blended in, you know, the implications for if this particular provider of services and licensing for us, you know, has a greater footprint within our organization. So we get some cost benefit from that. What does that mean in terms of the way that we can reach and deliver services out into the whole of our global organization? What are the kind of ethical implications of that? What are the investment implications of that? So they took a cost benefit and looked at it in the context of, you know, what it would allow them to do in terms of flexibility, the buying power, how they could do that out in the areas. And they were very concerned about concerned, that's not the right word. They're very interested in understanding the implications of that going back into the organization, and how it worked with that particular provider. So it's again a great example of how they blended both what would be a traditional vending approach with actually, you know, what are the implications for us, our overall ecosystem, and the way we buy these services from both a governance and a social point of view as well.
Yeah, it's hugely successful, that piece. The third one is a very famous European airline who've always been very dynamic in the way that they operate, but were beginning to be caught up by other airlines in their area, and also suffer from solutions that were aging, etc. we work with them to move a lot of their services out of more traditional hosted environments into the cloud. No, everybody is touched upon it, done it, etc. But this was a big lift and shift. But not only that, it was to look at how we could be much more operationally efficient. So by using sourcing models for that one, able to find better partners, niche partners, SMEs, to drive cost efficiency, but operational efficiency. And what that has now moved into, and I touched upon, is this observability piece where they are doing everything in and around the customer. So they're bringing huge amount of data points together to identify how they could better be efficient, but be better efficient with their customers, both internal and external. So it's a great story, and the savings are huge within that organization.
And the last one, again, I mean, it was driven by, and when we go back to what we said at the very beginning about some of the takeaways, a lot of this starts off with a kind of looking at a cost implication, but how do I drive from that some impact on other programs, other things that I'm doing? John's talked about some of the kind of client experience or the customer experience side of things, but it also allows them to fund the way that they go about different change programs, the way that they provide those services back into their own organization, and how ultimately those end up reaching the end customer. And so, this has driven a kind of complete change in their supply chain and the way that they think about those services being delivered, and in some cases the basis from which those services delivered. And then you get into the whole ethical provision of those services from those bases. Can we make sure that if we take services from a slightly different environment to the one that we've been used to doing, do they meet our own standards? Do they meet our own kind of ethical needs before we take those? So yes, cost is an implication of what they're doing, but also is that service going to be provided in an ethical and sustainable way? It's part of the thinking that went behind it.
Perfect. Thank you both. So I believe we're coming to the end. We are of our webinar this morning. We've had a number of people leave at 12:30, so I think a few people must have thought it was half an hour, but that's
lunchtime.
Lunchtime, no bother at all. But are there any questions for anyone who is still on the webinar? Please do feel free to use the chat or the Q&A functionality. If not, as it says in the top there, please do feel free to contact us for a more in-depth, no frills chat with Rob or John. We're very down to earth, and we're always really happy to chat to you.
You say it's not thrilling, Krista?
Always thrilling.
It's always thrilling talking to Rob.
If on ESG or vendor sourcing or anything that you would like to benchmark with the guys, they are a fountain of knowledge. So do feel free to reach out to any of us directly. You've got our contact details on this last slide. I don't think we've had any questions, guys. So without further ado, I will end the webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.